everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Fandoms Assemble, where we're breaking down content from all your favorite fandoms, from the Marvel Universe to Harry Potter and the wider Wizarding World, Disney, Pixar, Star Wars, Game of Thrones, and really whatever else this golden age of IP decides to throw at us next. My name's Steve O'Born Jr., and as always, I am your host, as we continue on this journey through the magic of modern-day media. I'd like to take a minute to thank you from the bottom of my heart for spending a portion of your day with me, and I hope you find this pod to be both entertaining and informative, but most importantly, a satisfying resource for all those who love to think way too hard about our favorite movies, books, and television shows. If you're like me, you run to the Reddit boards and Twitter feeds right after that latest episode drops, and you're already Googling Easter eggs on the ride home from the movie theater. Well, I'm here to tell you that that's okay. There are others of us out there, and I hope that Fandoms Assemble can be the arena where all that beautiful obsession can live and grow. Let's get to it. So this episode of Fandoms Assemble will be covering Loki Season 1, Episode 4. But before we get there, a quick recap of what we saw in Episode 3. So we start here in the aftermath of the time assault, Sylvie's attack on the sacred timeline with the time charges inside the Rocks cart. Now, that's the last time we'll mention that, because the show completely fucking forgot that happened. More on that later. Second, we got Sylvie and Loki on a rampage through the TVA. So they come out of the Rocks cart, they come into the TVA, and Sylvie is looking to slash and dash her way to the golden elevators that she got out of C20's mind in order to go and kill the Timekeepers. When approached by Ravonna Renslayer, Loki grabs a tempad and sends them to Lamentis 1 right before she's able to prune them out of existence. On Lamentis 1, we get a bunch of great conversations between Sylvie and Loki about their past, about their mother, about love, about what it means to be a Loki. But then Sylvie drops the biggest bit of news and the biggest bit of information that informs Episode 4 of this series, which is that everyone at the TVA is an ex-variant who's had their minds wiped by the Timekeepers. After trying to change the course of history and get the Ark, the escape vessel, off Lamentis 1 so that they can live, Loki and Sylvie find themselves standing in front of the ship as the planet crashes into Lamentis 1, destroying the Ark, and leaving Loki and Sylvie stranded, which is where we pick up Episode 4. But before we get back to Loki and full-grown Sylvie on Lamentis 1, we open up with a flashback here on Asgard, where we see a little girl, who is obviously a younger version of Sylvie, playing with dragon and Valkyrie toys, pretending that she herself is a Valkyrie. When that happens, the TVA enters through a time door and arrests Sylvie, charging her for violations against the sacred timeline. Sylvie's then taken to the TVA and processed the same way we saw Loki processed in Episode 1. And we get a reveal that Ravonna Renslayer is the hunter who comes and gets her and arrests her. After she is processed, however, and brought before the Time Court, Ravonna Renslayer loses Sylvie. Sylvie steals the tempad from her. She takes 3 steps back. I'm not sure why Ravonna didn't come after her. She sets a time door, she goes through it, and disappears. And that's all we get for right now of what happened to young Sylvie and her escape from the TVA. We then see Ravonna on the elevators going up to see the Timekeepers, and her eyes flash open. Later in the episode, she makes a snide comment to Sylvie that she doesn't know why she was arrested, but keep this moment in mind, that it doesn't matter how long ago it was, what time period, how much of life Ravonna Renslayer has lived, she still has daytime nightmares of Sylvie's escape from the TVA. She then gets off the elevators and walks in, and we get our first glimpse of the Timekeepers up on 3 chairs in a very smoky Chamber of Secrecy room, and roll Loki opening credits. We then cut back to Mobius outside the golden elevators with Ravonna coming back down after apparently getting her ass chewed out by the Timekeepers and asking her how it went. Ravonna says that the Timekeepers are pissed that Sylvie and Loki have disappeared. Not only were they after a very dangerous variant in Sylvie, but then Mobius, who got Ravonna to allow him to use Loki as an agent of the TVA, as an asset of the TVA, he loses him as well. But then we start down the road of Mobius turning away from Ravonna when he starts asking to see C20. C20, when he saw her in Rock's cart, kept saying, "It's real, it's real." She seemed shook, she seemed disturbed, but it was clear that her mind was fine. She was speaking in sentences eventually, one would presume. And upon questioning her further, Ravonna finally snaps and says, "C20's dead, you can't talk to her." Renslayer then says that she's very sorry, but Sylvie is so dangerous. She scrambled C20's mind so much that C20 could hardly form sentences by the end, and eventually she passed away. We know, as the viewer, having seen, obviously, Mobius steal Renslayer's temp pad later in the show, that Renslayer had C20 killed. There's no doubt about that she was going to reveal the big secret, which we get at the end of this episode, and C20 was killed. But now back to our boy Loki and our girl Sylvie on Lamentis 1 with meteors crashing down. Sylvie is sitting on a rock watching the destruction fall as Loki approaches and sits down next to her. He starts apologizing. Sylvie then starts talking about Asgard and about her time as an on-the-run variant, how she escaped the TVA, all about her arrest. She talks about Asgard, and it sounds like what she's saying here, she thinks her Nexus event was being born a female Loki. And when her being female turned down the path enough to disrupt the sacred timeline, that's why they came and nabbed her. Now, I have a theory on this, but you're going to have to wait until our top 5 questions segment later in this episode of what Sylvie's Nexus event truly was. Sylvie then talks about fleeing and living on the ends of 1,000 worlds, and now she is going to die at the end of this one. Very sad moment. Sylvie has been on the run her entire life. She's clearly faced so much trauma. She was just a little girl enjoying life. Odin and Frigga had been great parents who told her she was adopted. That's part of my theory. Again, stay tuned for later on in the episode. But that's what she thinks it is. Clearly, she's seen that this version of Loki is the version of Loki that was supposed to have existed on the sacred timeline. So any variation in appearance clearly was what must have caused her Nexus event. Okay? We then cut over to Mobius and B-15 looking for them in the main, part of the TVA where they have the screen that tracks the Nexus events. And again, I'll raise this question multiple times throughout the episode as I did in the intro. Where the fuck are all the time bombs? They did not deal with this at all. Sylvie and Loki came into the TVA immediately after the time assault. They were in there for 15 minutes by the time they got to the golden elevators. No one is dealing with anything related to all these time charges that went off. I raised multiple times in past episodes, you cannot solve, it was a beautiful crime. You can't destroy a time charge impact with a time charge. So how the hell were they going to reverse this? But apparently they did it in 5 minutes, and it wasn't a big idea. Wasn't a big deal at all, rather, because Sylvie and Loki come into the TVA. They escape from Ravonna. They're on Lamentis 1 for what, a day, maybe 2? And then we come back to that room in the TVA when they're looking for Loki and Sylvie, and we look at the screen. Loki and Sylvie hold hands, and we see that break, that Nexus event occur right about the red line. And there's no other color on the screen. Apparently, the sacred timeline's fine. Sylvie did absolutely nothing other than cause a diversion large enough for her to escape through her own time door into the TVA. I don't get it. She didn't really distract anyone enough. She still had to fight Minutemen to get to the golden elevators. So what the hell was the attack on the sacred timeline? What was the need for the time charges? I thought that was going to be the creation of the multiverse. But clearly Mobius runs a tight ship there, man, because they got everything under control and all these time charges were reversed. And Feige, the folks at Marvel, completely pulled a D&D here and forgot that they had set off a time bomb on the sacred timeline. We go back to Sylvie and Loki sitting on the rocks, and Sylvie says, hey, is what makes a Loki really about losing? We always lose at the end. And Loki says, no, we don't. We may lose, and we may lose often, and it may be very painful. But what Lokis never do is die. And if they lose in this instance, they're going to die. He says, Loki survived. That's what makes a Loki a Loki. Look at you. You're amazing. You're fantastic. All the things you've done. Shout out to Hotel Transylvania. They zing here, setting off that huge Nexus branch, allowing Mobius and B-15 to find them on Lamentis 1. Now, what does this mean? Are Loki and Sylvie really in love? We'll talk about that more later in the episode. But this love connection clearly causes this huge branch, and they escape through 2 time doors sent to them by Mobius and B-15. All right, we're going to move through these segments much faster. At the TVA, we then get Sylvie and Loki being arrested, processed, brought in handcuffs. We got 3 guards on Sylvie. We got 2 guards on Loki, which they mentioned to much jest. And Mobius is hurt when he goes into the interrogation room with Loki. He's hurt at Loki's betrayal. He thought that they were friends. He trusted him to go and find Sylvie. And the second Loki had a chance at escaping, he went through the time door with Sylvie. That's how Mobius sees it. Now, Loki was clearly just so interested in Sylvie, not in a romantic way right off the bat, but he was just so interested in Sylvie and the concept of there being another alternate timeline version of him who was a woman who had different experiences that he had to see it through, my boy. He had to go through the time door and find out what Sylvie was all up to. But for some reason, much against the character of Mobius, he doesn't understand that. He just calls him an asshole. He calls him a bad friend. He feels betrayed. And then before he throws Loki in a time cell, he says, do you have any last words before you get tossed in there? And Loki turns and says, yes, the TVA is lying to you. Mobius laughs, tries to laugh it off, but you can see in his eyes that there's something very wrong there. So he throws Loki into the time cell, where Loki relives the same moment over and over again with Lady Sif. She comes up. He apparently cut her hair at some point in the past. She comes up and questions him, accuses him of cutting her hair, beats him up, says that he's always going to be alone. He's always been alone. He always will be. He's a loser. And she leaves. And Loki just keeps living that again and again and again and again. While Loki is going through that torment, we get Mobius and Renslayer meeting again in her office, and Mobius wants to interview Sylvie. Renslayer says no, she's too dangerous. No one's allowed to speak to her, because even though, again, she gave Sylvie the impression that she hasn't thought about her again, we saw the flashback as she was going up the elevators to see the timekeepers. Renslayer thinks about Sylvie constantly. After she feels she puts the matter to bed, Renslayer says, hey, the timekeepers are keeping a close watch on this, and I need you to stay on your variant of Loki. I need you to go interrogate him. I need you to find out if they're planning something together. I need you to find out what the hell that Nexus event was. Mobius then leaves, and he runs into B-15 in the hallway outside of Sylvie's interrogation room. And they talk about what a pain in the ass Loki and Sylvie have been. And B-15, before he leaves, asks, hey, did Loki say anything to you? And Mobius says, well, yeah, he said that the TVA is lying to us. Why? And B-15 shakes it off. No reason. I'm just doing my job. But clearly we see something's bothering her, and it has to do with when Sylvie was in her head. Back to the time cell we go, and Loki and Sif, he's trying to try different tactics to break through and end the torment here. And he finally gets her by saying, listen, I know what I did to you was wrong. I'm a terrible person. I do it for attention. I crave attention. Please don't hit me anymore. I'm very sorry about what I did. And he gets through to her to a certain extent here. She doesn't beat him up. She doesn't hit him again. She just puts her hand on his shoulder and says, listen, you're alone and you're always going to be alone, which is clearly the pre-modeled response that she is supposed to have to Loki. She's meant in this time cell to drive that thought into his head based on an event that Mobius feels that would bring Loki some shame at this point. Shout out to Mobius for believing in our boy Loki, and that's something as far as altering the appearance of someone who believed he was a friend, or at least who was close to his brother, almost like family. At this point in his character development would bring him some level of shame and would be able to drive the message home. Good insight there on the part of our boy Mobius. Finally, Mobius himself enters and says, okay, are you ready to talk? So they go back into the time theater, into the interrogation room, and Mobius wants to know what the lie is. Is there really a lie that the TVA is telling me, or were you saying that just to cockroach out of getting in trouble? Loki then tries to bargain and says, well, if you're sure that I'm going to be safe and not deleted, I'll tell you what the lie is. And Mobius thinks, okay, you're just trying to weasel out of this. So he goes to his next set of questioning. What caused the Nexus event? Now, pause real quick. Important to note that he led with what is the lie. Mobius has always been a true man of the TVA, but when it comes to something that he's questioning internally, he leads with the what was the lie question. He then goes into what was the deal with that Nexus event. Hunter B-15 and I saw this giant spike in the timeline on Lamentus 1. That's why we were able to find you. What was the deal with that? Now, Mobius thinks that Loki is working for Sylvie. He says, are you guys partners? And Mobius threatens the time cell again when Loki doesn't want to answer his questions before Loki starts to make up a story about their quote-unquote plan. Now, he doesn't really give any concrete details, but he says, that Sylvie came to him on Asgard many years ago and they hatched this plan and it's going very well, thank you. And, this is their plan coming to fruition. And he says, when I was through with it all, I was just going to kill Sylvie and be done with it. And Mobius sticks the dagger between his ribs when he says, oh, no need to do that. B-15 already pruned her when Sylvie tried to escape. And when he sees the look on Loki's face, it clicks in his head that Loki and Sylvie, in some capacity, have fallen in love. And Mobius starts freaking out at this. He says, that's chaos. That is God-level narcissism for you to fall in love with a different version of yourself. That could be TVA breaking type chaos. Pause. Chaos. Wanda, chaos magic, breaking the TVA. Number 2, TVA breaking. Obviously, something between Loki and Sylvie, their connection is what's going to bring down the TVA. Why? Because Mobius just told us so. But then Loki breaks at this point. He's had enough of the joking. He's had enough of the questioning. He needs to get the truth out to Mobius. And he says, listen, you're all variants. You've been kidnapped. You've had your minds wiped by the Timekeepers. And Sylvie can access those old memories with enchantments. That is what C20 was talking about. We'll find out in a minute that that's what B-15 was questioning when she asked Mobius if Loki had said anything to him. Loki tries to explain that Sylvie's magic can only access old memories. Therefore, you guys lived lives outside the TVA. You were not created by the TVA. In the ultimate form of denial, Mobius then says, okay, we're done. I'm going to write up my report. You guys fell in love. That's what caused the Nexus event. That's how we found you. You're both in custody now. Nothing else really matters. He calls in some Minutemen to throw him back in the time cell because, quote-unquote, their interests are no longer aligned. Back outside of Sylvie's interrogation room, we see B-15 struggling. She doesn't know what to do. She's thinking so hard about whether she should go in, whether she shouldn't. She strikes her time baton, pruning stick, whatever the fuck you want to call it. I don't know what they're called. They haven't referenced them as anything, so I keep making up a word every different time I say it. She lights the thing that would prune Sylvie, and she walks in like she's about to do something in order to get past the other guards outside. If she just wanted to go in and talk to Sylvie, they wouldn't have allowed it because Renslayer doesn't want anyone else talking to her. Now, we're not going to go inside yet, but I'm just going to break it down here of what happens when she does. So she goes inside and she opens the door to Rock's cart, and later in the episode, we see them there in the pouring rain at that storm in front of Rock's cart, where Sylvie accesses her old memories again. She says, something happened inside my mind. Something's going on here that's not right, and I know that you know the answers to that. Sylvie says, yes, you guys are variants. I can access your memories. Everything I show you is real. So she does it again, and B-15 starts breaking down, crying. In a very sad moment, she says, I looked happy there, because clearly she is not happy here at the TVA. B-15 and Sylvie then team up right then and there to plan and fight back against the TVA. But before we get there, like I said, not there yet, that happens after this scene, we see Mobius and Renslayer back in Renslayer's office. He's signing the mission report, and again, he goes and he peeks down at that pen again before he gives it back to her. And they're closing the case. They got Sylvie and Loki in custody, and they're cheersing, they're toasting to a job well done and a mission solved. A23, who is Ravonna Renslayer, can finally put this case to bed because she's caught Sylvie, the variant who has plagued her entire career. Renslayer then starts to, feel him out. Maybe it's an odd question to ask for someone who doesn't want anything about their job or their situation in the world question. And she says, listen, Mobius, if you could go anywhere, anytime, where would you go? Mobius answers with the stock, the safe. I can go anywhere I want, and I do. But more importantly, he's there for a reason. Yeah, he's here to sign the mission report or whatever he was called here, but he wants some answers. He's starting to question what Loki is telling them. So he says, hey, why wouldn't you let me in there to interrogate Sylvie? And she says, I told you, she's too dangerous. So then he starts another line of questioning, asking, well, what happened with C20? Because when I saw her, she was fine. So what happened between the last time I saw her and the last time you saw her that led to her death. And Ravonna there gets dead serious, and she's like, dude, what is up with these questions? Why do you keep questioning what you're doing? Well, hello. You just opened that up by asking him to put himself in the fictional life. He's trying to ask the unknowns that he has in his own life. So Ravonna says, listen, the Keepers want to kill Sylvie. She tries to divert him, much like we saw in WandaVision. Anytime the facade started to fall in Westview, anytime Wanda tried to question her reality or Vision tried to question their reality, something always intervened. Someone snapped them back. Someone started acting the way they should. The sheen went back up. Well, this is what Ravonna does with him. He's starting to question his reality, and she says, listen, the Timekeepers want to kill Sylvie, and they want you invited. They want you to be there. You're the one that helped catch her. You're the big man on this case who finally brought down Sylvie, who's going to save the TVA. The Timekeepers want you awarded for being there for her pruning. She then takes out an old negotiation tactic and directly questions why he's being so suspicious. Make him explain himself, make him drop the line of questioning, because now you're calling him out directly for asking questions. And that part at least works. She doesn't have to answer anymore right now. Mobius breaks that off that conversation because he doesn't want to get involved with that anymore. And he says, hey, you got this cool Asgardian sword from Sylvie. And he goads her into saying, where are you going to put it? And makes her go up to her trophy case and put the sword up there, making her turn her back to him, in which case he's able to take the tempad out of his pocket and switch it out with hers. Here again is where we get that rocks cart scene that I mentioned. Not going to go into it again. And we see Mobius back down in the records department watching the C20 interview. For some reason, Renslayer's tempad is different than his tempad. Different access, I guess. So he goes into the file on C20 and sees her being asked about what happened. And she's validating everything that Loki said to him. She's talking about how when Sylvie went into her mind, she was able to access memories. She was really there in that bar. She really had friends. She really had a life. And she wants to know why she doesn't have those things anymore. When she keeps going down this line, we hear a voice say, that's enough, I'm ending this. And Ravonna's head comes in. Ravonna knows damn well that she could complete sentences, and now Mobius knows that she had C20 killed for asking those questions. Mobius then immediately runs down to Loki's cell and starts going to, listen, we have to work together. You could be whoever, whatever you want. Don't believe that you're alone in the world. That was just bullshit. You love Sylvie. We need to save her. We need to help you. We need to take down the TVA. And Loki's like, whoa. What the fuck's going on here? You just told me that I was wrong. I was a liar. I was an asshole, a bad friend. And now you're on my side. We're going to take down the TVA. What's the deal here? And he tells him, yeah, I know that you were right. I believe you now. I don't know. I can't remember if he tells him about the C20 interview explicitly, but he knows now that the TVA is all bullshit, that they were kidnapped and taken against their will. Their minds were wiped, and he needs to get the fuck out of here. So they step outside, and I don't really know how the hell she noticed it that fast. Ravonna needs to stay off her phone. Keep screen time in mind, folks. But I guess Ravonna noticed that the tempad was switched, and she's waiting there outside his cell, Loki's time cell, with a group of hunters to confront Mobius about stealing the tempad. Mobius's only thing is to say, oh yeah, wow. I didn't notice until I got down here that the tempads were switched. He tries to play dumb, and she's not buying it. He could tell she's not buying it, and then it clicks, and he says, you know what? If there's any place I could go anytime, I would go back to where I'm really from before you kidnap me. And before he could say another word, she has him fucking pruned, and Owen Wilson dies on screen without being able to ride his jet ski. We then cut to Ravonna walking down the hallway, where she stops by Sylvie's cell to pick her up to take her to the Timekeepers. Enough's enough. I'm not wasting any more time. Someone who I thought was a friend, I just had to have murdered again. So now I need to get Sylvie and Loki the fuck out of here so my life can return to normal. When she picks her up, I guess she sees that she has wet hair, which she didn't have going in. She says, who is in here? The other Minutemen say, we're sorry, ma'am. B-15 insisted on coming in here. And she sends out a bolo on B-15. She says, listen, she's been compromised by the variant as well. She needs to be found and she needs to be captured. So then we see Loki and Sylvie being marched to the golden elevators in a very sweet scene where Sylvie turns to Loki, not worried about herself, and says, "Hey, are you okay?" That is love there, folks. She is not worried about herself. She's been on the run for so many years, but she's truly worried about Loki at a time like this. We then leave the hunters downstairs as Ravonna, Sylvie, and Loki ride up the elevators, and she doesn't have a real weapon on her, so I don't know why they didn't attack Ravonna in the elevator, but I guess honor among villains here, they weren't going to do something underhanded as to sneak attack her in an elevator. I mean, that doesn't really go with the literal stabbing in the back of Coulson thing, but on their ride up, Sylvie gets the line I mentioned earlier where she asks Ravonna, "Do you remember me?" "Yes, of course I do." "Okay, well, what was my Nexus event?" Now, Ravonna could have told her, and it would have provided Sylvie some closure. But Ravonna is fucking evil, like I said a few episodes ago in her Fandom Academy. So she knew that it would hurt Sylvie more to tell her that I don't remember. I just prune people out of the timeline. I just arrest people and follow the timekeeper's orders. And I don't really know why I do it. I don't really care. It just brings me joy to get variants like you off the street, was kind of the vibe that I got there. And unfortunately, it worked. I'm starting to like Sylvie here, and it's apparent, very apparent, that this really bothered her. You see her eyes drop. You see her fucking soul split in two when Ravonna tells her that she doesn't remember what her Nexus event was. It was so unimportant that no one at the TVA remembers why her entire life was blown up to begin with. So they get up on the golden elevators, and they get up and they release to the timekeepers. And Sylvie and Loki immediately start bantering, arguing with the timekeepers, where our guys try to big time them and say, "Oh, we're so dangerous, you must be worried. What are you so afraid of?" And the timekeepers are trying to hold this allure of, "No, you're insignificant. We don't care about you. We just need to keep our timeline going, yada, yada, yada." And then they try to dismiss Sylvie, which she does not take laying down. And Ravonna goes and she does the little time collar thing on Sylvie to snap her back in place. And they go back and forth again. And finally, the timekeepers say, "Okay, enough of this. Delete them." And Sylvie starts to charge at the timekeepers. Now, Ravonna tries to hit the time collar thing again, but it doesn't work. And Sylvie's able to go back right where she was and keep advancing. And what we see is B-15 standing in the doorway of the elevator, doing a counterattack of sorts on Sylvie's time collar with her remote. And eventually she hits another button and Loki and Sylvie's collars pop off, and it's about to pop off. We get a big old fight scene here where Loki is fighting the hunters and Sylvie eventually starts fighting Ravonna Renslayer. With the hunters all killed, we then see Sylvie and Ravonna going at it, and Sylvie eventually knocks Ravonna out. And unfortunately, as the audience, we think that's the end of Ravonna Renslayer, but it is not. So again, after some quick quips with the timekeepers, where the timekeepers try to defuse the situation, now that there's no one standing between Sylvie and them, they say, "Listen, we could talk, we could work with you, you're one of our children as well." And Sylvie flicks that fucking Asgardian sword and cuts that dude's head right off, and it comes rolling down the stairs towards them. Unfortunately, however, we are in the land of Oz, and there is a man behind the green curtain, and the timekeepers are not real. When Sylvie and Loki pick up the head, they see that they are AI robots. Someone else is running the TVA. I wonder who it could be. Head back to the Fandom Academy. Pause this. We're 29 minutes in. Pause this right now. Go listen to the previous Fandom Academies if you have not, on the TVA and on Ravonna Renslayer, and you will be greatly enlightened as to who is running these automated robots. But that being said, it is all bullshit. It's all fake. The timekeepers aren't real. This room's not real. Someone else has the power of the timekeepers. Perhaps they were real at some point and they've since been dethroned. I don't know. But they're clearly not in charge now, and someone else is pulling the strings. But they move off that for a moment for Loki to start and provide comfort to Sylvie, who's clearly distraught. She spent years of her life on the run, plotting to come and kill the timekeepers, and when she finally buries her sword in the neck of one of them, it turns out that they're already dead and there's robots in their place. He then starts to comfort her, and he starts to profess his love to her, I believe. He says, "Listen, this is hard for me. I've never done this before. all the things you would say for a guy who was afraid of commitment and now he wants to profess a love to a girl. And holy shit, he gets pruned in the back by Ravonna Renslayer. And for like the 8th time in the MCU, we see Loki's body fade from sight. We saw him die in like 4 movies at this point. And now again, when we thought we were getting him back to life, he dies here again. Sylvie, obviously pissed at this. Ravonna tries to come at her. She breaks that fucking stick right out of her hand and is holding the pruning to her and says, no, now you're going to tell me everything I need to know. But wait, we get a post-credit stinger, folks. And as I said, Loki's died like 8 times already, and he will come back a 9th. We come back to Loki waking up. Again, shout out to Leonardo DiCaprio in Inception-like style, gasping for breath, like he's washing up on the shores of his own subconscious. And he wakes up and says, am I dead? Is this hell? Hell with one L, if you had the subtitles on, being the Old Norse hell. He says, am I dead? And we hear a voice off screen say, no, but you will be if you don't come with us. And after what was a very good action-packed episode for the casual MCU fan, i.e. my wife, we get a zoom out of what will surely be the deepest droves of comic book canon for the next episode as we see Kid Loki, Classic Loki, Worthy Loki, and none other than an alligator version of our boy Loki. He is on what appears to be, wait for the Fandom Academy in this episode to find out where I think Loki woke up. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, as you know, Fandoms Assemble strives to be the #1 resource on the internet for all those who love to think way too hard about our favorite movies, books, and television shows. But to honor that promise, we can't just give you the same old boring episode breakdown. We got to give you some analytics. We got to give you some things to think about. We got to break down scenes. We got to go into comic book canon. We got to dive into the hard-hitting questions that just simply weren't answered in this episode. So, with no further ado, here are the top 5 questions we had from Loki, Season 1, Episode 4. Question number 1. And I brought this up 2 other times in this episode, but why are they acting like the fucking time bomb attack never happened? We were in the TVA what appears to be mere minutes after Sylvie sent all those time charges out, and we saw the screen, which tracks all the Nexus events, go haywire. And I talked about in this show, in prior episodes, where I said that I thought it was a genius attack because she's creating Nexus events with a time charge. And the time charge is the TVA's only method of breaking down a Nexus event. So you can't just create a bigger hole to get rid of the one that you already have. And I get it. The TVA has access to what's theoretically unlimited time. But we didn't see them enact that power here. So we show back up to the TVA where everyone should have their hair on fire, where the multiverse should be created right here and right then, and no one fucking cares. No one's paying attention to the Nexus events on the screen because they don't exist. We see the one Nexus event of Loki and Sylvie zinging and holding hands and falling in love, and that's it. New York, Tokyo, Vormir, Asgard, Jotunheim, Hala, Xandar, Ego, Titan, all these places that were attacked by the time bombs, and no one cares. Nothing happened. Nothing happened with Sylvie's attack at Roxcart. That's infuriating. I said before, it's like D&D and Game of Thrones where, oh yeah, they kind of forgot. You remember all those memes? Well, Kevin Feige kind of forgot that he set up a fucking multiverse event in episode 2 and then completely ignored it in episodes 3 and 4. Question number 2. What was Sylvie's Nexus event? Now, in the episode, we talked about how Sylvie thinks it was her being a woman, that the sacred timeline version of Loki was supposed to be a man, and when her being a female strayed her timeline far enough away from the sacred timeline to create a Nexus event that they come and plucked her. That's what she said, that, you know, her being a princess and not a prince, I think is the verbiage she used there, is what caused her Nexus event. But I think it's something different. So when we see Sylvie playing on the stairs, clearly that it was this moment in time that caused her Nexus event. So we see her playing on the stairs, and she's playing Valkyrie. She's playing with Valkyries and dragons and pretending to be a hero. Now that's the important part to me, because in Thor Ragnarok, when Thor first meets the Valkyrie, he tells her how he used to play Valkyrie as a kid. So this version of Sylvie clearly wants to be a hero. And I think that is where the TVA has a problem with her timeline. Somewhere inside her at that moment, firmly committed that she was going to try and be a Valkyrie. She was going to be a lady warrior. She was going to be a hero of Asgard. And the TVA needed Loki to be a piece of shit for the timeline to continue. So furthermore, I'll go into this a little in our tinfoil hat time, more so in the last tinfoil hat time. Go check out episode 3. I firmly believe that Kang the Conqueror, especially after we find out that these guys are androids, that Kang the Conqueror is the true villain of this story, that he's secretly pulling the strings behind the TVA with his wife, his girlfriend, his love, Ravonna Renslayer, at the operational helm. I think that Kang the Conqueror needs Loki to be a villain in order to fulfill his true destiny. He needs Loki to do the Battle of New York. He needs Loki to try and steal the Tesseract. He needs all this shit to happen for him to gain control and to continue to conquer timelines. And if Loki is a hero, much like Hades trying to take out Hercules in the Disney version of that story, trust me, I'm a Greek mythology buff. I know that it's extremely inaccurate. But in that story, in the Disney version, Hades tries to take out Hercules as a baby in order to prevent him from becoming a hero on his 18th birthday and stopping Hades' plan to release the Titans. I think that Kang the Conqueror's view, that version of Sylvie was a threat to him because that version of Sylvie was going to grow up to be a hero. Well, much like Hades, she's going to enroot this shit, and she's going to take down the TVA as a hero now that she's going to have all the information that Ravonna knows in combination with being extremely pissed off that they killed her boyfriend. Question number 3. Speaking of her being her boyfriend, are Sylvie and Loki really in love? So we get the moment on Lamentis 1 where they lock eyes. I said they zinged. Shout out to Adam Sandler and the folks at Hotel Transylvania. So they held hands and they created a huge Nexus event. And Mobius had said them loving each other, two like beings truly falling in love, rather, two versions of the same being falling in love would be chaos magic that could bring down the TVA. Now I'm going to say, yes, they're truly in love. Why? Because they are the only person on the face of the planet that could possibly understand the other one. Loki and Sylvie are two of the most misunderstood characters in the history of their worlds. They superficially are villains because no one will allow them to be the hero. Sylvie was trying to be a hero, I contend, and they ripped her out of the timeline so that she would stay a villain. Loki, for all his faults, for all the time he's killed people and actually done bad things, he always turns around to doing the right thing. Loki truly loves his family. The Loki, capital L, big capital L, the being of Loki, truly loves his family and those around him, and Loki and Sylvie are the only ones who can understand all the nuances of the god and goddess of mischief. Question number 4. What does Ravonna Renslayer know, and who is the wizard behind the green curtain? So, we know that Ravonna Renslayer is clearly intimately involved with the hoax that's going on at the TVA. She knows that everyone who works for the TVA is variants who have been kidnapped, which is why she wanted C20 dead, which is why she killed Mobius, which is why she got so offended that he was asking so many damn questions. But what we clearly also know is that Ravonna Renslayer had no fucking idea that the Timekeepers were animatronic robots. She's sitting in the elevator going up there sweating it out. She wouldn't be doing that if she knew that they were fake and Kang the Conqueror was pulling the strings. So, what is her deal and how much does she know? And how much is she going to be able to help Sylvie in the next episode? She's got a pruning stick held to her throat right now, needing to provide information to Sylvie which will drastically change the scope of the MCU going forward. And I have no idea what that information she knows is. And last but not least, question number 5 in our Fandom Academy for this episode. So one you've all been waiting for, folks. And because we got that post-credit stinger, it makes perfect sense to do it right here and right now. So, who is our boy Loki? Once again, as you know, Fandoms Assemble strives to be the #1 resource, the #1 podcast in the world for all those who love to think way too hard about our favorite movies, books, and television shows. To honor that promise, we can't just raise life's great questions. We got to answer a few of them ourselves. So sharpen your pencils, crack open your textbooks. Please always remember you are not alone. And join me for this episode's Fandom Academy on Loki. So to start this off, as you're all aware, I'm sure, Loki, as is Thor, as is Odin, is a real god of Norse mythology. We have Greek mythology, we have Roman mythology, we have Indian mythology, we have all these different mythologies around the world, and shout out to Ancient Aliens, a lot of them seem to coincide with each other, but we'll get into that in a completely different podcast. Go watch Ancient Aliens if you haven't watched it. But that being said, Loki is a god of Norse mythology, as we've talked about in this show before. But that will not obviously be the Loki we'll be covering today in this episode's Fandom Academy. The one we'll be covering in this Fandom Academy will be the Loki of Earth 616 from the Marvel comic books canon. So now that's out of the way, and I've avoided hurting the feelings of any mythology buffs here. Our version of Loki from the Marvel comics was created by our boys Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and first appeared in August 1949's issue of Venus #6. The modern-day version of our Loki first appeared in Journey into Mystery 85 from October 1962. This character, which is based on the Norse deity of the same name, is the Asgardian god of mischief and the adopted son of Odin and the brother of superhero Thor. Loki is portrayed both as a supervillain and an anti-hero, and in the MCU is a frost giant by the name of Loki Laufeyson, a.k.a. son of Laufey, the king of the frost giants, who were defeated in Thor the Dark World. As far as Loki's abilities in the comics, of course, as the god of mischief, he is the master of manipulation and deceit. Also, as an Asgardian, he has superhuman strength, speed, durability, and longevity, all the important traits of a true Asgardian warrior, as well as some Asgardian magic from his mother Frigga, including astral projection, energy blasts, flight, illusion casting, interdimensional transportation, shapeshifting, and telepathy. If these powers seem familiar, then obviously you are one of my favorite people on this planet because you listened to last week's episode, episode 3, where our Fandom Academy covered Sylvie Lushton. Of course, as the female version of Loki, or in the comics, a creation of the god of mischief himself, and given the powers of an Asgardian, he copy-pasted the same shit that he could do. So for today's Fandom Academy, we pick up with the powers of Loki, and they are the same goddamn thing. Now, because that would be extremely boring to just regurgitate the same things I told you last week, we're going to be tackling this Fandom Academy completely different from how we've tackled the Fandom Academies of other characters, where I just, give you their biography and where I think they might be going in this story. And we're going to break down the post-credit stinger, where we saw Kid Loki, where we saw Worthy Loki, where we saw Classic Loki and Alligator/Crocodile Loki in what I think is none other than Battle World. So first up, we're going to tackle Kid Loki, first appearing in Thor number 617 from January 2011. Following the death of his brother Loki at the hands of the Void and the Sentry, Thor makes it his mission to bring his brother back to life. Unbeknownst to him, however, prior to Loki's death, he made a deal with their big sister Hela to remove his name from the Book of Hell, thereby making it impossible for him to die. As Thor is strolling down the streets of Paris, France, he comes across the reincarnation of his brother Loki, conning passerbyers on the streets of Paris via a card game. With no memories of who he was or what his brother looked like, obviously, Kid Loki runs away as Thor tries to accost him in the streets of Paris. When Thor finally catches him, he is able to restore a piece of Loki's memory. Storylines involving Kid Loki also involve such villains, of course, as Surtur, the bringer of Ragnarok, Galactus, who we've talked about many times on this podcast as a potential foil to the Fantastic Four, also Nightmare, a primary villain of Doctor Strange, who, as I mentioned in episode 1, was referenced by Mobius with the Nightmare Department. We see Kid Loki with the Silver Surfer, with the New Mutants, with many other characters, which leads Kid Loki to be referred to as one of the MCU's best gods, which of course includes Thor, Odin, Hercules, Zeus, and many, many other gods in the MCU when they start to bring mythology into the overall picture. But there's your quick background on Kid Loki. Number 2, we see Classic Loki. It's the old guy in the very comics-accurate costume of Loki from the 1940s. This version of Loki doesn't necessarily have a canon storyline as quote-unquote classic Loki, but earlier iterations of Loki were generally older in appearance, darker in personality, and more explicitly villainous in their actions than this kind of campy, happy-go-lucky, witty version of Loki that we've gotten so far in the MCU, because Tom Hiddleston is such an engaging and enigmatic actor. This is the Loki, played by Richard Grant, that we hear say, no, but if you don't come with us, you're going to die. Clearly, this one will have a darker personality and will be more accurate to the Loki, again, from the early iterations of the comics from the 40s to the 60s, where Loki definitely wasn't there to serve an anti-hero purpose. Number 3 to the left here, I've been referring to him as Worthy Loki because he's holding Mjolnir. That's what I thought I read they had named him at some point, given that he's worthy enough to hold Mjolnir, but apparently he is referred to in the show's credits as Boastful Loki. Now, unfortunately here, Boastful Loki does not have a direct comic counterpart. That being said, he is most traditionally, out of all the Loki variants there, dressed as a traditional Asgardian warrior in black and gold armor with a matching black and gold hammer, as this variant, Boastful Loki, appears to be an alternate reality version where Loki kind of took more of the characteristics of Thor than that of Loki. I brought up earlier in the episode how Sylvie, I believe, was either supposed to be a Valkyrie or was some way supposed to be a hero in her timeline and was then ripped out. It appears that this version of Loki was able to stay alive longer, to get older at least, and clearly become the muscle of this group of Lokis again on what appears to be Battle World. Stay tuned for this episode's Tinfoil Hat Time. And then last but not least, Alligator Crocodile Loki. As I research what the hell this could mean, I see articles, God bless the human race, where scientists from around the world are discussing whether this variant of Loki was a crocodile or he was an alligator. If you had any question about the power and the reach of the Walt Disney Corporation, of the Marvel franchise as a pillar of the history of media, here you go. We have the world's greatest minds trying to figure out whether the Loki variant in this stinger was actually an alligator or a crocodile. In terms of if he has a role to play in the MCU moving forward, other than the comedic relief, obviously, in the next few episodes, maybe a future, as we've seen many references in these Disney Plus shows, starting with Howard the Duck back in the main title films of the Pet Avengers coming to the MCU. So stay tuned on where Crocodile Loki goes from here. But to wrap up this Fandom Academy, I just want to go into a little prose of my own on Loki and what I think he means for the MCU. And I think the role that Tom Hiddleston has played as we, what I think, wrap up his storyline here in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and as this version of the Loki character. Loki in the Marvel Comics is an all-time villain and one of the most complicated, nuanced characters in the history of storytelling. In 2014, IGN had Loki ranked as the number 4 comic book villain of all time. Number 4. Now, since then, he slipped a little bit in the rankings, but let me just give you an idea on who's before him. 1, Ra's al Ghul, obviously played by Liam Neeson in the Batman films. Number 6 is Darkseid, one of the DC Universe's most powerful villains and one of the main villains of the Snyder Cut that we heard so much about over the last few months. Number 5 is Galactus, one of the primary villains in the history of Marvel Comics, and we've talked about him a lot, his maybe impending arrival into the MCU as the Fantastic Four, and some of the larger properties get involved here. Number 4, Lex Luthor, Superman's all-time nemesis. Obviously, you get a bump when you're squaring off against Superman. Number 3, Doctor Doom. Number 2, the Joker, maybe the most iconic villain of all time. And number 1, Magneto. To be in the same conversation as those characters, and to be above characters like Two-Face, like Catwoman, like Norman Osborn, a.k.a. the Green Goblin. I mean, Loki in his own right deserved his own Disney Plus TV show and a much larger piece of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And then Tom Hiddleston just fully elevated him into the stratosphere with his portrayal of this character. And he's the reason why we're getting Loki on Disney Plus and why Loki's character from the very beginning has been steering the ships of the Infinity Saga and is now setting up Phase 4. And it's thanks to these characters that we saw in this stinger at the end of the episode that we've discussed here in Fandom Academy, all these different variations of Loki, and most importantly, including our version of OG Loki and Sylvie here as being, the MCU's take on Lady Loki. All of these different quote-unquote variants of Loki are what has fed his legend, are what have informed Tom Hiddleston's portrayal of this character, and what have made this show such a fantastic watch. As well as giving you some insight here as to what we might be seeing out of these characters in episodes 5 and 6, once we return to Battleworld, presumably at the beginning of the next episode. But quickly, as we're running out of time, some rapid-fire Easter eggs that you might have missed. Number 1, when Mobius and B-15 are in front of the Time Theater where Sylvie is being held for interrogation, Mobius mentions, "We've had Kree, Titans, vampires in here. How are 2 variants of Loki such a pain in the ass?" Kree, Titans, vampires. Kree, obviously Captain Marvel. Did Jude Law somehow run across Owen Wilson at some point at the TVA? Titans, Thanos. Is there an evil variant version of Thanos running around? For the love of God, please let Thanos' story die. 2014 Thanos in Endgame was a variant of himself, I guess. Why the TVA didn't step in there then, I don't know, but please, please, please do not bring Thanos back. And then vampires making reference to Blade, who is coming back to the MCU, set to start production in July 2022. Number 2, in that post-credits stinger, we clearly see a destroyed version of Avengers Tower. As I'll go into in this episode's Tinfoil Hat Time, I believe they are on Battleworld, where remnants of all of Kang's conquests are sent, and this piece of Avengers Tower clearly shows a timeline where the Avengers fell and Kang had taken over New York City. Number 3, we'll harken back to the scene where Loki and Sylvie are sitting on the rocks, looking at the meteor shower and being reminded of Loki and Thor's conversation, their last conversation with Odin before Hela came back in Thor Ragnarok. A lot of folks in the trailers, including myself, believe that this was Natasha and Loki sitting on Vormir, given the short haircut. Now, obviously, seeing that this is Sylvie with blonde hair, it appears that Natasha may not be returning to the MCU after all, even with a success in Black Widow coming up next week. And number 4, when Ravonna Renslayer is on the golden elevators heading up to see the Timekeepers, we see her flash back to Sylvie's trial after she was arrested by the TVA. We can clearly see that at that point, Ravonna Renslayer was a hunter herself, wearing the number A23. A23 being a reference to Avengers 23, not only representing the first appearance of Ravonna Renslayer in the comics, but also featuring Kang the Conqueror, who we all know, thanks to the Fandom Academy on Ravonna Renslayer a few episodes ago, is none other than her Bootang. And that'll do it for this episode's Rapid Fire Easter eggs that you might have missed. That's right, it is Tinfoil Hat Time, everyone's favorite segment, where I take a few minutes to go into my crazy-ass theories about how the property we're watching will impact the larger universe it inhabits. So for this, Loki Season 1, Episode 4, how will this season wrap up, and how will it impact the larger MCU? With a lot to delve into here in a short amount of time to do it, everyone, please don your tinfoil hats and indulge me for a few minutes as I give you my crazy-ass theories following Loki Season 1, Episode 4. Number 1, we're going to recap the theories we already made that I think are going to hold true as we close out this season of Loki. Most importantly, number 1, after Sylvie cuts the head off the Timekeeper, it is apparent that the Timekeepers are not running the TVA. It's also apparent that Ravonna Renslayer knows what the fuck's going on here. Now, what I question is the fact that she was going and meeting with these animatronic robots to begin with. Is she just up there FaceTiming her boyfriend Kang, or does she not really know that the Timekeepers are fake, even though she knows that everyone in the TVA is being held hostage? I'm going to say when Sylvie gets around to interrogating her in Episode 5, we're going to find out that Ravonna was put there as a front for her boy Kang the Conqueror as he goes through and uses the TVA to manage the timeline and to ensure that the timelines in which he stays in power, the timelines in which he conquers hold true, and the remnants of those timelines, as I brought up in the Fandom Academy, are what is being sent to the garbage battle world that we see Loki wake up in the post-credit stinger. So after it's revealed that Kang is really in charge here, what does that mean for our boy Loki, who's stuck on Battleworld? Now, Battleworld, for all those, I know I keep referencing it here, and I haven't actually gone into what the hell that means. Probably should have done that in the Fandom Academy, but since you're all here and still listening, strap up, because here's your 2-second summary on what the Battleworld is. Battleworld was a patchwork planet constructed by the Beyonder, who uses pieces taken from hundreds of worlds, including Earth, to create an arena for his Secret Wars. Hey, you know Secret Wars? It's a show coming to Disney+. During this time, Dr. Doom, remember him? He's a main villain of the Fantastic Four, stole the Beyonder's powers. Towards the end of this conflict, the Molecule Man transported the suburb of Denver, which had been stolen from Earth, back home. Molecule Man is another Easter egg which ties into the FDR high school pen that we see in Ravonna Renslayer's office. Molecule Man, another creation of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby from 1963. Real name Owen Reese from Earth 616. Went to high school in Brooklyn. Now, that's two characters, Steve Rogers and the Molecule Man, that we both see from Brooklyn. As we know, many of the storylines revolving around the MCU are based in New York City. Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, Captain America. But Molecule Man, along with the Beyonder, who is kind of another abstract, ego-like character where he is like all of space and time in reality, were very central characters in this Battleworld storyline, where the Beyonder created this Battleworld basically as his own little playpen of making Earth and the rest of the universe's mightiest heroes fight against each other. So it's apparent that perhaps the Beyonder is somehow tied into the TVA, and why, when characters get pruned from the sacred timeline, they would go to this Battleworld is still up in the air. I'm assuming we'll find that out in episode 5. And then what happens to Loki on that Battleworld? I mean, is he going to be able to make it back to the TVA from where they get pruned? None of these other characters have apparently been able to. I mean, they're talking about having to prune Kree, Titans, vampires. I mean, are all these characters actually in this place where the other variants of Loki are? Are we getting the multiverse introduced as all of these characters break out of this battle world, courtesy of Loki trying to get back to Sylvie? Or is Loki done and his storyline is just going to continue on to the Secret Wars franchise, and he's going to go off in like a Skrull path, and meanwhile Sylvie is going to be left in the sacred timeline to bring down Kang and the TVA, and then continue as Loki, with those two storylines paralleling each other, but the two of them never making it back. But now that I'm thinking about it, this is Tinfoil Hat time, and I'm raising a lot of questions here versus giving you some theories. So like I said, Kang is obviously in charge now at the TVA. He is the man behind the curtain, to reuse that Wizard of Oz metaphor. Loki here is going to somehow rally all of the variant Lokis as well as all of the other characters in here. And it wasn't going to be Sylvie's timeline bomb that creates the multiverse, but it is going to be all of these characters breaking off of Battleworld back into the sacred timeline that will create the multiverse. And then as for Sylvie, we're going to see her get out of this. We're going to see her take down Kang in the TVA. And then we're going to see her go be Sylvie Lushton, a.k.a. the Enchantress, the member of the Young Avengers, teaming up with Billy, Tommy, Patriot, a.k.a. Eli Bradley, teaming up with Hawkeye's daughter, Ant-Man's daughter, and all of the many, many characters that we've seen enter the MCU through the Disney Plus shows that are going to create probably the Young Avengers, I'd say, in Phase 5. But now that will do it for another episode of Fandoms Assemble. Thank you all for joining me here today. Loki Season 1, Episode 4 was a great, great episode. Probably the best episode of television that they've come out with so far on Disney+. And that's across all of the MCU properties. I'm going to say that's including The Mandalorian. Haven't watched The Bad Batch yet because I didn't get into the Star Wars animation. But definitely the best episode of television they've put out so far. And now, if you agree that that was the best episode of television, and therefore this was the best episode of Fandoms Assemble you've heard so far, and you're not doing so already, please go, share, rate, and review on whatever your preferred podcast channel is. To properly rate and review, please head over to Apple Podcasts or find a friend with an iPhone and go on their phone and use the Apple Podcast app to give us that 5-star rating. And please stop right now. Go write us a little review. Let me know you're listening. You also need to be mashing that download button on all of your podcast providers. I don't care which one you're listening to. Go on multiple. That's fine too. Go on and download the episode. That's the only way I'll know you're listening. While you're trying to find that friend with the iPhone, it is your obligation, if you enjoy the Fandoms Assemble podcast and you have a loved one in your life, whether that's a parent, a brother, a sister, a cousin, a grandparent, a neighbor, a dog, a coworker who enjoys the MCU, who's been loving Loki, maybe they've been loving Falcon and the Winter Soldier too, and you think that they would enjoy the Fandoms Assemble podcast, it is your obligation as a good friend to share this episode of Fandoms Assemble with them. And please, also, go follow us on socials at FandomsPod, at FandomsPod on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Full episodes are up on YouTube if you have a friend who prefers not to listen on a podcast channel, but make sure they go and download anyway, even if they want to listen to YouTube. But go follow us at FandomsPod on Instagram and TikTok for clips of this episode, more hot takes coming from me, news and notes on different properties and things of that nature. And while you got that handle stuck in your head at FandomsPod, please go use it on Patreon.com as well. Patreon.com/FandomsPod, Patreon.com/FandomsPod. Patreon is a resource where consumers of content can go and support their favorite content creators. Please, for a minimum of $5 a month, you can go and support the show. You can help grow the show. You can get more on-time episodes, as well as exclusive content coming only to Patreon.com. There on Patreon, we'll be covering Cruella, we'll be covering Raya, we'll be covering Luca, and all of the other new Disney properties that are coming out. That will be our first venture into Patreon exclusive content. Will be in the Disney realm. So if you're a Disney fan, in addition to being a Marvel fan, please go head over to patreon.com and subscribe to support the show. And I promise that premium content, that exclusive content that will be only for your ears as a supporter of the Fandoms Assemble podcast will be there on our favorite Disney properties that have come out in 2021. And one more quick note, if you enjoy the Loki podcast, the Loki coverage of Fandoms Assemble episodes 1 through 4, there are 7 more just like it. If you haven't listened to Falcon and the Winter Soldier already, if you haven't listened to the 7 episodes we have up on whatever podcast provider you're listening to right now, go head over to Falcon and the Winter Soldier and listen to those 7 episodes. Again, hit that download button. If you haven't watched Falcon and the Winter Soldier yet, it is spoiler-free. It's a companion podcast, much like this episode of Loki, this season of Loki has been. It's a companion podcast, so watch the first episode of Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Listen to the podcast. If you already watched Falcon and the Winter Soldier and you just want to listen to the podcast, I obviously go through the same episode summary in each episode of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, so you don't need to really watch the episode. I'll remind you what happened, and you can just picture it in your mind's eye as you're listening to my take on Falcon and the Winter Soldier, how I think that's going to impact the larger MCU. Important to note, I am Captain America's #1 fan, so I truly enjoyed the Falcon and the Winter Soldier show, and I can't wait to get more content out of Sam and Bucky in the future. And even though it was the first few episodes of Fandoms Assemble and we were still getting our footing here and being able to talk in front of a microphone for an hour, I feel like my passion for the Captain America character truly came out in that podcast, and you will truly enjoy it as a result. But most importantly, your fifth obligation as a listener of this show who's dedicated their last 60 minutes to being on the other end of my voice is please join us next time when I'll be covering Loki Season 1, Episode 5. We're starting to get towards the end here. Things are going to pick up, and the long-term implications of this show are about to explode in front of our very eyes, and I can't wait to cover it all with you. I know today's Wednesday. I'm dropping the show as Episode 5 is already dropped, I promise. I'm turning off the mic. I'm going to watch. I'm going to outline, and I'm going to record it tonight. And hopefully we will get that spun around faster than this one. I apologize for the week delay in getting these episodes out to you. Again, if you get on patreon.com, you support the show, you share it with your friends, you blow this thing up, and I will be able to dedicate all my time and adoration to all of you listening to this podcast. And you will be getting on-time content in addition to, way more content, way more takes from me. If you've enjoying them, which I hope you are since you've been listening for the last 60 minutes, I want to thank you very much from the bottom of my heart for spending a portion of your day with me. I love you all so much. Thank you for supporting the show and all you do in growing the Fandoms Assemble podcast. Until next time.